Okay, hello Julia. Thanks for being up with us. We are at the conference that is all about data. So I wondered whether could you explain to us what is the role of data in crime, but also in investigating crime from a law enforcement perspective?
Well, luckily, we've seen over the last 10, 20 years a steep decrease in violent crime, so where people get involved with each other physically. But on the other hand, we've seen a rise in computer or cyber-based crime. So the more our data, our society gets digitalized, and the more data we use, the more data gets abused. So, for example, in the Danish police, Denmark is a very digitalized society, basically cashless. We've seen an increase in sexual abuse or sharing of images of sexual abuse, online harassment, grooming, sharing of hate, porn, financial crime involving data, identity fraud. So a steep increase. And of course, the more data is the basis for crime, the more law enforcement also needs to process that data, collect that data, and also, of course, use forensic methods that involve more data processing. So data has been basically one of the most important currencies we've seen in law enforcement, and we can also see just in the staff that we have hired. I mean, basically, yes, we still have the traditional police guy and the vest and the hat and with the pistol, but we've in the Danish police we have a huge unit of engineers, IT engineers, for example. So people without a traditional law enforcement background, people who study political science, who do data analysis. So we see it in all aspects of police work.
Oh, very interesting. And you, as a data protection expert, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what is the challenge of data protection in policing and law enforcement?
Here I have to give one caveat, because I don't know if all of my police officer friends would agree, but I personally, and also in my role as data protection officer, don't see data protection and police work as a dichotomy, because the police, of course, is interested in good data quality and data integrity, and that we collect the right data and only the right amount of data. I mean, we're public administration, we don't have unlimited resources, so that also means that we don't have an interest in collecting bulks and bulks of data, because we would need personnel and people to go through that data and find the relevant data, because at the end of the day we want to find the data that is relevant and right to get it into an investigation, and data that can hold in court so that the bad guys or women actually end behind bars, and that our case doesn't fall in court. And that has always been an interest for the police. It's just been more, I think, come into more focus, and also sometimes it's been drawn up as something that police is not interested in data protection. It is not true, and also right now with the current focus on cyber threats, etc., data protection is also very elemental to protecting also police work. So I think it actually strengthens our organization also to think through some of the methods. And here I think the data protection legislation has given us quite a good framework also for the questions that we need to ask before we get into a process of developing IT systems. So in a way, I think it has helped the organization to get more experts on board that look into different aspects. And also, in a sense, I mean, in Denmark, for example, the public trust in the police is very high, and we're dependent on that trust, because if we don't have the trust, we won't get allowed to process data. I mean, if for the people who come from a German context, they will know that that trust in the German police is considerably lower, and that limits police methods. Because in Germany, it's very hard for the police to do the same things that we are allowed to do in Denmark. But that trust means that I also have to watch that data, because if there's a big data scandal, then I will lose that trust and I will lose the investigative measures. So I think it's actually quite important to see data protection as a tool.
Yeah, you mean that basically the trust level influenced legislation, and then.
Yeah, of course, and also understandably so. If let's say that you find out as the public or politician that data has been flawed, maybe leading to incorrect convictions, then of course people ask questions like, if the police cannot handle these kind of data, can we then allow the police to collect even more data?
Yeah, I see.
And of course, like if we don't have the procedures in place, then we shouldn't be allowed to collect the data. I'm not saying that it's always easy. I also think that some of the regulation is maybe a little bit too strict and a little bit not looking at the reality of law enforcement, but I think the overall purpose and also like the overall idea behind data protection by design, technical organizational measures make sense in law enforcement, but have also existed before. So,
yeah, you already referred to the Law Enforcement Directive, which is basically the small sister of the GDPR, regulating the processing of data in law enforcement agencies in the EU. So your panel is also on the Law Enforcement Directive. Maybe you can let us know what, in your perspective, works well, what doesn't work well with the current legislation.
Well, as I said, like I think the general like technical neutrality works well. Also, some of the things where you actually just have very broad standards that refer to technical and organizational measures, because they feed into some other standards that are in place with regards to information security in the police. So there, I would be very sad to see more regulating, because there's already this body of ISO standards and more technical standards that I think work very well for the police, and that are updated regularly. So here I hope that the EU legislator just backs off and leaves that work to the experts, which are mostly our technicians. So that works well. What I personally find quite challenging, and where I hope that some more smart people like you do more research on, is the question of data processors for the police. The Law Enforcement Directive does not, as we read it at least, allow for the police to have data processors in third countries or insecure third countries. And that I think is a little bit strange. And here I think I have a suspicion that it's actually a mistake, that because it's the little sister of the GDPR, that people forgot that this could be an issue. Because if you think about what are we doing, then GDPR regulates, for example, how the health sector processes data. So the data is as sensitive, basically, as data that we have in law enforcement, and there you're allowed to use data processors in third countries. Of course, it's become a little bit more complicated, but it's not impossible. Yeah. And especially mentioning data and the role of data in investigations. I mean, we're talking about very complex crimes. I mean, I could basically say the crimes that we see now are more complex than ever before, and that often requires specialized services, especially in smaller countries like Denmark. So you cannot afford to have all of these specialized experts in the police force, so you would be actually sometimes dependent on a data processor in a third country. And right now I don't see it as a possibility. We've asked the Commission, and there's no movement on that, so I would hope that some people look more into that. And then also sometimes how the LED works together with the other, with the rest of the legal framework that regulates law enforcement, because law enforcement is super regulated. We have criminal procedural law, we have administrative law, we have all kinds of legal systems that have always regulated law enforcement. And here we see some need for clarification, especially with regards to data subject rights, where we feel that criminal procedural law, that also has this whole concept of data or access to information in criminal procedural law, we feel that there's some need for clarification how that actually works together with data protection law. So I hope for some scholars and PhD students and whatever that they look into these more nerdy aspects. They might not be or not seem as sexy as like artificial intelligence and these kind of things, but they are very real in daily life.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, then thank you, Julia, very much for this inspirational insight into these topics, and looking forward to your panel.
Thank you.
Have a great conference.